deep beneath the earth in the heart of the Pacific Ocean on Iwo Jima. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi commanded his post in February 1945. This bunker, like hundreds of others, was carved into solid volcanic rock and protected by 3-foot-thick walls of reinforced concrete. For months, Allied forces pounded these fortifications with tons of bombs and shells, but even direct hits, capable of leveling entire buildings, barely scratched their impregnable surfaces. Japanese soldiers proudly called these strongholds invincible, while American Marines, having experienced their deadly power, nicknamed them death traps. Any frontal assault invariably ended the same way. Marines perished under hail of fire before they could even approach the bunker entrances. The defenders' calculation was simple and ruthless. 20,000 Japanese defenders, an inexhaustible supply of ammunition, and perfectly calibrated fields of fire. But on that fateful morning, something landed on Iwo Jima's black sand beaches that was not in any Japanese intelligence report. These were 8 M4A3 Sherman tanks. At first glance, they seemed ordinary, but there was one subtle detail that the defenders couldn't discern from their concrete fortresses. These tanks weren't carrying conventional shells. Instead, they were equipped with sealed tanks filled with napalm fuel, capable of spewing 100 yards of liquid fire on demand. The Japanese had built a perfect defense against everything they knew about American warfare tactics. They couldn't have imagined that the Marines were about to completely change the rules of the game. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. What happened on Iwo Jima? And why did this seemingly straightforward assault become a turning point in the history of warfare? How did the Americans manage to break through what appeared to be an insurmountable defense? And what innovations changed the course of the battle? In this story, we will delve into events that are not only shocking in their brutality, but also make us ponder. What if conventional methods stop working? Perhaps you too have faced situations where old approaches proved powerless in the face of new challenges. This episode isn't just about war. It's about how courage and unconventional thinking can breach even the thickest walls. The pre-dawn gloom of February 19th, 1945, enveloped Iwo Jima in a deceptive calm. Captain David Shoup, hunched in a cramped landing craft, intently studied reconnaissance photographs one last time. The images mercilessly revealed what Allied command had dubbed the most formidable defensive position in the entire Pacific. The volcanic island had been completely transformed into an impregnable concrete fortress. 500 pillboxes, bunkers, and gun emplacements were carved directly into the rock and further reinforced with steel. Each position was expertly interconnected with others, creating overlapping fields of fire capable of literally mowing down attacking forces from multiple directions simultaneously. Shoup carefully folded the photographs and tucked them into his field jacket. Around him, Marines from K Company mechanically checked their weapons with the precision of men acutely aware of their meager chances. The preliminary bombardment, the heaviest in the history of the Pacific theater, had lasted 74 days of continuous shelling, transforming the island's surface into a crater-pocked moonscape. Yet, aerial reconnaissance revealed a disturbing truth. The bunkers remained virtually untouched. 3 feet of reinforced concrete had withstood punishment that would have leveled entire city blocks. 800 yards offshore. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi emerged from his command bunker to personally observe the American fleet gathering in the pre-dawn haze. 900 vessels stretched across the horizon, their silhouettes black against the shimmering star-filled sky. Kuribayashi had spent 8 months meticulously preparing for this moment, transforming Iwo Jima into what he sincerely believed was an impregnable fortress. His engineers had dug 11 miles of tunnels connecting all defensive positions, allowing troops to move discreetly between bunkers. Artillery pieces were housed in caves, carved deep into the volcanic rock, and securely protected from counterfire by tons of stone overhead. The Japanese general had thoroughly studied American tactics during his previous assignment in the United States. He perfectly understood their preference for overwhelming firepower, invariably followed by a direct infantry assault. His defensive system was designed precisely to neutralize both these advantages. The bunkers were intended to absorb the full force of the bombardment, then decimate infantry attacks with concentrated machine gun and artillery fire. Simple, proven, mathematically sound. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Exactly at 09:00, the engines of the landing craft roared to life. Shoop felt the deck vibrate beneath his boots as the Higgins boat surged towards the black sand beaches. The preliminary bombardment had ceased, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the diesel engines and churning water. Intelligence suggested the Marines would face the bloodiest assault in the Corps' history. Standard tactics called for an artillery barrage, followed by an infantry advance supported by conventional tank fire. Every Marine in the landing craft understood the brutal arithmetic of bunker warfare. Attackers required overwhelming numerical superiority to overcome fortified positions. The first wave landed on the beach precisely at 09:30. Machine gun fire erupted from hidden positions, mowing down Marines before they could advance past the surf line. Mortar rounds exploded with deadly accuracy across the entire landing zone. Each blast sent geysers of black sand and shrapnel tearing through the ranks. Shoop watched his men dive for cover behind scattered debris, pinned down 50 yards from the surf. The bunkers had withstood the bombardment exactly as Kuribayashi had predicted. From his command post, the Japanese general tracked radio transmissions with grim satisfaction. His defensive plan was working perfectly. American casualties mounted, while his own forces remained safely protected in their concrete shelters. The interconnected fields of fire prevented any significant advance, forcing the Marines to cluster in kill zones where artillery could annihilate entire units. This was precisely the battle Kuribayashi had meticulously prepared for. A grueling war of attrition designed to bleed the Americans dry. But something about this assault was different, something Kuribayashi couldn't yet grasp. Behind the initial waves of infantry, 8 unusual Sherman tanks rolled off specialized landing craft directly onto the volcanic sand. These M4A3s looked identical to standard armor from a distance, but closer inspection revealed critical modifications, and it was these modifications that would be key to understanding how the Americans managed to turn the tide of this seemingly hopeless battle, which we will elaborate on in the next segment. Imagine, you are confident in your impregnability. Your fortress, your bunker, has withstood the most terrible bombardments, artillery fire, and a relentless hail of bullets for months. You know that no one can breach this wall of concrete and steel. But what if I told you that a single, previously unseen machine could turn this indestructible fortress into an inferno in mere seconds? How was this possible? And what terrifying weapon changed the very concept of fortified warfare? We will tell the story of how desperation spawned unprecedented power, and how engineers, faced with an insurmountable task, created something that forever altered the outcome of battles. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. While standard combat vehicles of that period were equipped with 75mm guns, these modified tanks carried an entirely different armament. Specialized fire-throwing systems connected to enormous fuel reservoirs. The flamethrower mechanism was capable of projecting a stream of burning liquid up to 100 yards, which was more than enough to reach bunker entrances while remaining outside the effective range of enemy small arms. Sergeant Walter Lutz commanded the lead flamethrower tank. His crew was crammed into the steel hull, which housed 400 gallons of napalm fuel, maintained under 800 pounds per square inch of pressure. The Marines nicknamed these machines at Triumphs, a bitterly ironic reference to the popular lighter. Lutz had undergone intensive training with the flamethrower system, meticulously learning how to coordinate fuel delivery and ignition timing for maximum destructive power. This new weapon proved incredibly effective against fortified positions, but its use came with significant dangers. The fuel tanks turned each machine into a potential bomb, and its limited range required crews to advance deep into enemy kill zones. The Japanese defenders had never encountered flamethrower tanks before. Their intelligence reports contained no mention of such armored vehicles, and their defensive positions were designed to counter conventional artillery and small arms. As Lutz's tank began its advance toward the first bunker complex, the machine gunners inside the concrete structure prepared to engage what appeared to be a standard Sherman. They had already repelled dozens of similar attacks using proven tactics. Wait for the tank to approach, then concentrate fire on its vision slits and tracks. Stay with us and watch until the end, as we'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, don't forget to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. At 75 yards from the target bunker, Lutz gave the order to fire. A powerful stream of burning fuel erupted from the tank's flamethrower nozzle, cutting through the morning air like liquid lightning. The napalm struck the bunker's embrasure and surged inside, instantly filling the concrete chamber with flames reaching over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The Japanese soldiers inside had not a single second to flee or even comprehend what was happening. The reinforced concrete that had previously protected them from artillery shells transformed into a deadly oven, trapping superheated air and toxic smoke. Within moments, the supposedly impregnable position was completely neutralized. Marines who had previously been pinned down by intense machine gun fire from that bunker were suddenly able to advance. But the psychological effect of this event surpassed any tactical advantage. Across the battlefield, Japanese defenders watched in horror as their strongest positions erupted in flames. The concrete walls they had trusted with their lives offered absolutely no protection against this new, terrifying weapon. General Kuribayashi initially received the first reports with disbelief. Bunkers capable of withstanding months of bombardments were being destroyed in seconds by individual tanks. His meticulously constructed defensive system, based on proven principles of fortification warfare, was crumbling under the onslaught of a weapon he had never seen and could not have even imagined. The Americans had changed the fundamental nature of bunker warfare, and his preparation suddenly proved completely inadequate. For the first time since arriving on Iwo Jima, the Japanese general felt the cold touch of doubt. The concept of mounting flamethrowers on tanks arose not from strategic planning, but from desperate necessity. 6 months prior to these events, Marine Corps engineers at Quantico observed rapidly increasing infantry casualties during assaults on Pacific Islands. Realizing that conventional weapons could not effectively neutralize Japanese bunker systems, Colonel Robert Blake, head of the Marine Corps Equipment Board, authorized experiments with fire-throwing systems after reviewing casualty reports from Saipan and Guam. A standard infantry flamethrower had a range of only 40 yards and required soldiers to approach within grenade-throwing distance of enemy positions, which was tactically impossible against well-protected bunkers. The solution lay in scaling up existing technology. The Navy's Bureau of Ships developed fire-throwing equipment designed to clear beach obstacles, utilizing pressurized fuel delivery systems capable of projecting burning liquid significantly farther. Blake's engineers adapted this naval equipment for installation on M4A3 Sherman tanks, creating unique hybrid machines that combined robust armor protection with incredibly destructive firepower. The modification process required removing the tank's 75mm gun and replacing it with a flamethrower nozzle connected to fuel tanks installed inside the vehicle. Captain Robert McVeigh oversaw the conversion of the first 8 prototype vehicles at Major Island Naval Shipyard in December 1944. Each tank carried 400 gallons of napalm fuel, a special mixture of gasoline thickened with polystyrene to create a substance that burned longer and adhered to surfaces more effectively than pure gasoline. The fuel system operated under pressure generated by compressed nitrogen cylinders, allowing crews to project flames up to 100 yards with enough accuracy to hit bunker embrasures from relatively safe positions. The flamethrower itself was a marvel of engineering precision. The nozzle assembly featured adjustable flow controls that allowed crews to vary the flame intensity from narrow streams for precise targeting to wide patterns for area coverage. Ignition was provided by pilot burners, fed by a separate fuel system, ensuring reliable flame generation even in the harshest combat conditions. The entire system could deliver continuous fire for 90 seconds or approximately 30 individual bursts of flame, depending on duration and intensity settings. McVeigh insisted on extensive crew training before deploying the machines to combat. Tank crews had to master the fuel system operation, flame-throwing methods, and tactical application procedures, which were fundamentally different from those used with conventional armored vehicles. Unlike standard tanks, which engaged targets at maximum range, flamethrower tanks required close coordination with infantry and careful positioning for maximum effectiveness while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. These machines were particularly vulnerable to artillery and anti-tank weapons due to their fuel load and the need to operate at relatively short distances. The tactical doctrine for using flamethrower tanks evolved through trial and error during training exercises. McVeigh's crews learned to coordinate their attacks with infantry advances, using conventional tanks for long-range fire support, while flamethrower tanks destroyed specific targets blocking infantry movement. The most effective technique involved approaching bunkers at oblique angles, which masked the tank's approach until the final assault phase, when speed and surprise could overcome defensive fire. Sergeant Lutz became the most proficient flamethrower tank commander during training, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of flamethrowing tactics that impressed his instructors. His crew, driver Private Johnson, gunner Corporal Martinez, and loader Private Davis, practiced bunker assault procedures until they could perform complex maneuvers without verbal communication. The coordination required between crew members exceeded that of conventional tank operations, while flamethrowing demanded precise timing and positioning with no room for error. The psychological impact of flamethrower tanks was impossible to predict during training exercises. No amount of preparation could simulate the terror that flamethrower weapons instilled in enemy soldiers, or the boost in Allied morale when previously impregnable positions suddenly became vulnerable. Stay with us and watch until the end. For a like and a subscription, we would be especially grateful. And of course, write in the comments where you're watching from. Intelligence reports from the European Theatre of Operations suggested that German forces abandoned positions rather than face flamethrower attacks. But the Pacific Theater presented different challenges due to Japanese defensive tactics and cultural factors that made surrender extremely rare. The logistics of flamethrower tank operations demanded extensive support infrastructure. Each vehicle consumed fuel at a rate orders of magnitude greater than conventional ammunition. A single day of combat operations could deplete a tank's fuel supply, necessitating frequent resupply missions under fire. The napalm mixture required specialized handling procedures and storage conditions, complicating field logistics. Furthermore, the compressed nitrogen system required regular maintenance and pressure checks to ensure reliable operation in combat. Marine Corps doctrine traditionally emphasized firepower and mobility, but flamethrower tanks represented a departure from established tactical principles. These vehicles sacrificed long-range fire capability and ammunition capacity for a specialized bunker-busting ability. The compromises forced commanders to re-evaluate fundamental assumptions about armored vehicle employment, particularly the relationship between tanks and infantry in assault operations. Conventional wisdom dictated that tanks should provide fire support from positions that maximized their armor protection and gun range. But flamethrower tanks demanded aggressive positioning that exposed them to concentrated enemy fire. The decision to deploy only 8 flamethrower tanks on Iwo Jima reflected both resource limitations and uncertainty regarding their combat effectiveness. Marine Corps planners allocated limited space for experimental weaponry, prioritizing proven systems over untested innovations. These 8 tanks constituted the entire inventory of combat-ready flamethrower vehicles available to Pacific Fleet Marine forces, making their effectiveness critical for future flamethrower weapon development programs. The technical specifications of the M4A3 flamethrower variant included armor thickness ranging from 25 to 76 mm depending on location, providing protection against small arms fire and shell fragments, but leaving it vulnerable to anti-tank weapons and direct artillery hits. The vehicle's weight increased from 33 to 37 tons due to fuel system modifications, which reduced mobility and increased ground pressure on soft surfaces like sand. Engine performance remained sufficient for tactical movement, but fuel consumption significantly increased due to the added weight and power demands of the flamethrower system. The flamethrower nozzle could traverse 30 fingers left or right of the tank's center line, with an elevation adjustment from 10 to plus 120 deg. This limited traverse required careful positioning to engage targets, as the tank's hull had to be oriented toward the target area before effective flame projection was possible. Crew visibility was restricted compared to conventional tanks due to modifications required for the fuel system installation, making coordination with supporting infantry essential for situational awareness and target identification. Private First Class Hiroshi Shigeta crouched within Bunker Complex 7 Alpha, watching American tanks advance across a killing field his unit had prepared for months. The concrete walls around him were 3 feet thick, reinforced with steel rebar, and designed to withstand direct hits from battleship guns. His Type 96 machine gun was positioned to cover the primary approach route, with overlapping fields of fire from adjacent positions, ensuring no enemy could cross the open ground without sustaining casualties. Everything proceeded as planned until the lead American tank halted 75 yards away and aimed something other than a gun barrel in his direction. The stream of liquid fire that erupted from Lutz's tank transformed the battlefield in a way no tactical manual had foreseen. Have you ever wondered what lies behind those terrifying stories of flames erupting from tanks, or how a single machine could alter the outcome of an entire battle? What if I told you there are tactics that completely revolutionized warfare, causing the enemy to flee in panic without even engaging in direct combat? And how is it even possible that on battlefields dominated by steel and explosions, a weapon emerged capable of instilling such primal fear? We have all encountered situations where there seemed to be no way out, where an obstacle appeared insurmountable, whether it was concrete fortifications in war or our own internal barriers in life. And here lies the secret. Just as flamethrower tanks manage to breach seemingly impregnable defensive positions, there are ways to overcome your most difficult challenges. We've often said that viewer expectations should be met from the very first seconds. So, in this account, we will reveal 3 key aspects that made flamethrower tanks a true nightmare for the enemy. And here is the first one. Stay with us and watch until the end for a like and subscription. We would be especially grateful. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The main theme of this narrative is the unique, at times brutal, yet incredibly effective tactics of flamethrower tank deployment during World War II, particularly in the Pacific Theater of Operations. These machines, radically different from conventional combat units, demanded an entirely new approach to coordination, positioning, and most importantly, an understanding of their psychological impact. We will delve into a world where traditional notions of armored warfare were shattered. How did these specialized machines, so vulnerable and logistically demanding, managed to become such a formidable force? What tactical techniques allowed them to overcome their drawbacks and transform into an effective weapon against fortified positions, and why, despite their experimental status and limited numbers, did they play a decisive role in certain operations, striking terror into the enemy and boosting Allied morale? Prepare to learn about a doctrine forged through trial and error, about brave crews who practiced maneuvers until they became second nature, and about how a stream of liquid fire could transform a battlefield in ways no tactical manual could have foreseen. For it was here, on the brink of desperation and innovation, that solutions capable of changing the course of history were born. Unlike their conventional tank counterparts, which unleashed their firepower on the enemy from a respectful distance, flamethrower tanks demanded almost intimate proximity to their targets. This was not merely a technique, it was an art of approach, where every movement, every meter closer to the enemy was meticulously calculated. The objective was to maximize the destructive effect of the flames while simultaneously minimizing the risk of being destroyed by return fire. Imagine a tank crew, acutely aware of their vulnerability, deliberately closing in, where every enemy shell could turn their vehicle into a fiery trap. Their Achilles heel was evident. A massive supply of highly flammable fuel made these machines incredibly vulnerable to artillery and anti-tank weapons. Every deployment to the battlefield was a gamble with death, where the slightest error could lead to catastrophe. This is precisely why the tactical doctrine for employing these fire-breathing monsters could not simply be copied. It was forged in agony, through countless training exercises, through the sweat and blood of crews who, step by step, felt their way toward effectiveness. Crews under McVeigh's command, whose names are now etched in history, were pioneers of this new tactic. They learned to coordinate their actions with advancing infantry, creating a symbiosis where conventional tanks provided long-range cover, while flamethrower vehicles, like surgeons, precisely eliminated targets that became insurmountable obstacles for the infantrymen. This was not merely support. It was intricate work demanding absolute mutual understanding. The most effective approach to bunkers these impregnable fortresses of concrete and steel involved stealthy close-quarters maneuvering. Tanks approached them at oblique angles, utilizing any terrain features to mask their movement. Only at the very last moment, when surprise and speed could be decisive factors, would they break into a direct assault. This was a moment of truth, when even the densest defensive fire could be overcome by sheer audacity and skill. Sergeant Lutz, whose name became synonymous with masterful flamethrower tank operation, was a true phenomenon. His intuitive grasp of flame projection tactics astonished even the most seasoned instructors. He viewed the battlefield not merely as a collection of targets, but as a living organism where every movement had to be precise and timely. His crew, driver Private Johnson, Gunner Corporal Martinez, and loader Private Davis operated as a single mechanism. They practiced assault operations until complex maneuvers became second nature, requiring no verbal commands. This was the highest degree of coordination, surpassing anything required in conventional tank operations. For flame projection allowed no errors. It demanded absolute precision in timing and positioning. Yet beyond the tactical aspects, there was something that could not be predicted in training. The psychological impact of flamethrower tanks. No drill could replicate the primal terror that a flame-engulfed weapon instilled in enemy soldiers. And of course, nothing could boost Allied morale quite like seeing previously impregnable enemy positions suddenly rendered vulnerable, with the enemy gripped by panic, fleeing and abandoning their fortifications. Intelligence reports from the European theatre of operations merely confirmed this. German forces preferred to abandon their positions rather than face a flame attack. However, the conditions of the Pacific Theater presented entirely different challenges. Japanese defensive tactics, reinforced by cultural factors that made surrender exceedingly rare, demanded even greater ingenuity and ruthlessness. And here, flamethrower tanks fully unleashed their potential. Flamethrower tank operations required colossal logistical support. These machines were true fuel guzzlers, consuming it in volumes that were orders of magnitude greater than conventional ammunition. 1 or 2 days of active combat could completely deplete supplies, necessitating frequent and extremely dangerous resupply missions under enemy fire. It was a race against time and resources, where every drop of napalm mattered. The napalm mixture itself required specialized handling procedures and specific storage conditions, turning field logistics into a true nightmare. Furthermore, the compressed nitrogen system, essential for flame projection, needed constant maintenance and meticulous pressure checks. Any malfunction could lead to failure at the most critical moment, rendering a flamethrower tank a useless pile of metal. Marine Corps doctrine traditionally relied on firepower and mobility, but flamethrower tanks represented a radical departure from these established principles. They sacrificed long-range fire capability and reduced conventional ammunition capacity for one specialized function: bunker destruction. This was a compromise that forced commanders to re-evaluate fundamental assumptions about armored vehicle employment, particularly the interaction between tanks and infantry in assault operations. Traditional military wisdom dictated that tanks should support infantry from positions that provided maximum armor protection and main gun range. But flamethrower tanks demanded aggressive, almost suicidal positioning that exposed them to concentrated enemy fire. This was a philosophy of risk, where the cost of error could be prohibitively high. The decision to deploy only 8 flamethrower tanks on Iwo Jima was driven by 2 factors: resource limitations and uncertainty regarding their actual effectiveness in real combat conditions. Marine Corps planners allocated only modest space for experimental weaponry, prioritizing proven systems over untested innovations. These 8 vehicles represented the entire combat-ready inventory of flamethrower tanks available to Pacific Fleet Marine Forces. Their success or failure would be decisive for the future development of flamethrower weapons. The technical specifications of the M4A3 flamethrower variant reflected these compromises. Armor thickness ranged from 25 to 76 meters, providing protection against small arms fire and fragments, but leaving the tank vulnerable to anti-tank weapons and direct artillery hits. The vehicle's weight increased from 33 to 37 tons due to fuel system modifications, which negatively impacted mobility and increased ground pressure, especially on soft surfaces like sand. Engine performance remained sufficient for tactical movements, but fuel consumption significantly increased due to the added weight and heightened power requirements of the flamethrower system. The flamethrower nozzle itself had a limited range of motion, 30 degrees left or right of the tank's center line, and an elevation adjustment from 10 to plus 120. This meant that effective target engagement required careful positioning of the entire tank hull. Crew visibility was significantly restricted compared to conventional tanks due to modifications required for the fuel system installation. This made coordination with supporting infantry vitally important for maintaining situational awareness and identifying targets on the battlefield. Private First Class Hiroshi Shigeta, hidden deep within Bunker Complex 7 Alpha, watched the slow but relentless advance of American tanks across what he called the killing field. His unit had prepared this position for months, transforming it into an impregnable fortress. 3-foot concrete walls reinforced with steel were designed to withstand direct hits from battleship guns. His Type 96 machine gun was ideally positioned, covering the main approach route, with overlapping fields of fire from adjacent positions ensuring no enemy could cross the open ground without sustaining irreparable losses. Everything proceeded according to plan until the lead American tank halted 75 yards away. And what it aimed at the bunker was no ordinary gun barrel. The stream of liquid fire that erupted from Lutz's tank transformed the battlefield in a way no tactical manual, no military strategist had foreseen. It was a moment when history took a new turn, and fear and terror became a new weapon. In the darkest moments of war, when death hangs in the air, humans instinctively seek refuge. They erect impregnable walls, trusting in the might of concrete and steel, considering them the last bastion of safety. But what if all these fortifications, considered unshakable for decades, transform into a fiery trap in an instant? What if the very ground where you sought salvation turns against you? And how is it possible that a single weapon can change the course of a battle, breaking the will of even the most resilient defenders, sending them fleeing in the face of an unseen threat? This story is not merely about battles and tactics. It is about the moment when the customary rules of war were rewritten by fire. Today, we will delve into events that forever changed the perception of fortification and assault, demonstrating that even the most formidable bunkers can be destroyed in mere seconds. We will reveal how such a weapon appeared on the battlefield, why it became so lethally effective, and how its deployment impacted the psychology of soldiers on both sides of the front. Perhaps you, like many before you, believed that strong walls guaranteed survival. But what you are about to learn will force you to reconsider those convictions. So, prepare to discover 3 key moments that made flamethrower tanks a true nightmare for defenders. And the first of them manifested with terrifying clarity in one of the most ferocious theaters of war. Stay with us and watch until the end. For a like and subscription, we would be especially grateful. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching us from. We are very interested to learn the geography of our audience. This was the reality Shigeta faced as he watched burning fuel cleave the air like molten lightning, slamming into his bunker's embrasure with the fury of a dragon's breath. The napalm, like a fiery torrent, splashed against the concrete surfaces and steel structures, then surged through the opening like superheated water. instantly filling the chamber with flames exceeding 2,000 Deganiev. The robust walls that had protected him from months of continuous artillery barrages suddenly transformed into a merciless oven, trapping superheated air and toxic smoke. Shigetta's screams ceased in less than 3 seconds as the inferno consumed all the oxygen in the confined space. This was not merely an assault. It was instantaneous and complete annihilation, a harbinger of a new era in combat tactics. Captain Shupp witnessed this horrifying scene, observing the bunker's demise from his position 50 yards behind the tank assault line. The concrete structure, which had held 2 platoons of Marines at bay for 3 hours, simply erupted in flames and then fell silent. No more machine gun fire. No more mortar rounds exploding on the beach. The position, identified by intelligence as a primary defensive strongpoint, had been neutralized by a single 8-second burst of flame. This spectacle made Shupp realize that they were facing something entirely different, something that demanded an immediate re-evaluation of their entire strategy. Shupp immediately grabbed his radio and requested urgent coordination between the remaining flamethrower tanks and his infantry companies. If this new weapon possessed such destructive power against fortifications capable of withstanding months of bombardment, then the entire tactical situation on Iwo Jima had to change. He understood that the potential of this weapon was immense, and its proper application could pave the way through seemingly impregnable Japanese defensive lines. But how exactly to integrate this force into the overall strategy? Stay with us and watch until the end. For a like and subscription, we would be especially grateful. And, of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching us from. We are very interested to learn the geography of our audience. Meanwhile, Lutz, commander of one such tank, traversed his vehicle's turret 10 degrees to the left, targeting the next objective, a reinforced pillbox housing a 75mm anti-tank gun that commanded the main approach to the island's interior. The Japanese position was constructed from 5 feet of reinforced concrete on all sides, with steel plates protecting the gun's embrasure. Conventional tank fire had ricocheted off this fortification without any visible effect, and an infantry assault was utterly impossible due to overlapping fields of fire from supporting positions. This target seemed impregnable, but Lutz knew he had the answer. He ordered his driver to advance 20 yards closer, reducing the effective range to 60 yards for maximum flame penetration. The anti-tank gun crew inside the pillbox had never before encountered flamethrower weaponry. Their training focused on identifying armored vehicles and engagement procedures for conventional tanks, with tactics based on precise gun laying and ammunition selection for various target types. They were prepared for tanks that spewed shells, but not for those that spewed fire. As Lutz's tank approached their position, Gunner Corporal Yamamoto prepared to engage what appeared to be a standard Sherman moving at an optimal range. The flamethrower nozzle was not immediately recognizable as a weapon system, and Japanese intelligence had provided no information about American flamethrower tanks. Yamamoto was adjusting his gun's elevation when the world around him suddenly erupted into liquid fire. What happened next was as swift as it was deadly. A torrent of napalm struck the gun embrasure with devastating accuracy, surging through the opening and coating every surface inside the pillbox with burning fuel that adhered with equal tenacity to concrete, steel, and human flesh. The gun crew perished instantly, suffocated by superheated gases that scorched their lungs before they could even inhale. The 75mm gun, capable of destroying any tank on the battlefield, was rendered useless metal within a casemate engulfed in flames that raged for the next 6 hours. The position controlling the central approach to Mount Suribachi was neutralized in less than 10 seconds. This episode only confirmed what Shoop was already beginning to suspect. They had a game-changing weapon on their hands, but its effective deployment required complex coordination. McVeigh, observing this, coordinated the advance of the remaining 7 flamethrower tanks across the volcanic beach, directing each vehicle towards specific targets identified in close liaison with infantry commanders. The tactical application of flamethrower tanks required careful integration with support forces, as these vehicles were vulnerable to enemy fire during the approach phase and desperately needed infantry protection to prevent Japanese soldiers from attempting close-quarters assaults with satchel charges or magnetic mines. Coordination proved significantly more challenging than exercises had suggested, as radio communications deteriorated in combat conditions, and thick smoke from burning positions obscured visual signals. But even with all the difficulties, the psychological effect of this new weapon was already beginning to spread across the island. The psychological impact of these fiery assaults rapidly spread through Japanese defensive positions across the island. Soldiers, who had spent months constructing what they believed were impregnable fortifications, watched in horror as their strongest bunkers burst into flames and fell silent in a matter of seconds. The concrete walls they had trusted with their lives offered no protection against a weapon capable of penetrating embrasures like molten water. Radio messages from forward positions described American tanks spewing fire like actual dragons, causing panic among defenders who had prepared for conventional warfare, but were now confronted with something far beyond their experience and training. This wave of fear even reached General Kuribayashi. General Kuribayashi observed the evolving tactical situation from his command bunker, deep beneath Mount Suribachi, receiving increasingly desperate radio messages from his forward commanders. The American advance was moving far faster than any scenario his staff had rehearsed. Defensive positions expected to hold for days were falling within hours. Flamethrower tanks were annihilating bunkers faster than his reserves could reinforce threatened sectors. His meticulously constructed defensive system, designed to channel American attacks into predefined kill zones, was crumbling as these fiery machines tore through the positions that formed the backbone of his entire strategy. And while this was a tactical success for the Americans, it created new, unexpected problems. The tactical success of the flamethrower tanks, which brought such rapid progress, created new, sometimes unforeseen challenges for Marine commanders. Infantry companies pinned down for hours were suddenly able to advance quickly through terrain that had previously been utterly impassable under machine gun fire. The speed of this breakthrough threatened to outpace artillery support and logistical resupply, potentially creating isolated pockets of Marines deep within Japanese-held territory. Shoop coordinated with battalion headquarters to ensure that the pace of the flamethrower tanks' advance was synchronized with conventional tanks and artillery, maintaining vital mutual support between the different weapon systems. But even with such synchronization, resources had to be constantly monitored as the flamethrower's power was not limitless. Private Davis, loader and crewman on Lutz's tank, fed compressed nitrogen into the fuel system while monitoring gauges indicating the flamethrower's remaining capacity. Each napalm shot expended approximately 12 gallons, 45 liters of fuel, and the 400-gallon, 14-liter tank capacity allowed for roughly 30 separate flame attacks before resupply was required. The logistics of flamethrower tank operations differed fundamentally from conventional armor, as fuel consumption significantly outpaced ammunition expenditure. Davis estimated his tank had enough fuel for 6 more bunker attacks before being forced to return to the beach for replenishment. Thus, even the most destructive weapon had its limitations, and understanding these limitations was key to its effective application on the battlefield. The Pacific War. In 1945, Iwo Jima, the site of one of the bloodiest battles. What made this battle so unique, and why does it still spark so much debate among historians? How did American forces manage to breach what seemed like an impregnable Japanese defense? And why was it on this island that two such different military doctrines clashed, determining the outcome of the entire campaign? Prepare to learn about the tactics that changed the course of the war, about courage that bordered on madness, and about the price paid by both sides for every meter of this scorched earth. If you've ever wondered how victory was achieved where it seemed impossible, then this video is for you. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. The third bunker complex targeted by Lutz's tank served as a critical nexus, coordinating all defensive artillery in the island's southeast sector. Japanese radio operators, sheltered within this hardened position, maintained continuous communication with artillery batteries skillfully camouflaged in caves throughout the volcanic terrain. They directed counter-battery fire with surgical precision onto American positions and synchronized defensive maneuvers between disparate strongpoints. The destruction of this facility was tantamount to blinding Kuribayashi's forces in a critically important sector of the battlefield, leading to a collapse of the command and control system that formed the backbone of his entire defensive network. Corporal Martinez, operating the tank's flamethrower system, meticulously adjusted the projector nozzle for maximum penetration and initiated the ignition sequence. Pilot lights flared, powered by a self-contained propane system, ensuring reliable flame generation even in the harshest combat conditions. The fuel gauge showed optimal operating parameters, and the traverse mechanism flawlessly aligned the projector with the target bunker's main communications antenna. Martinez pressed the trigger, and a pressurized stream of napalm erupted, traveling 55 meters across the volcanic sand before slamming into the bunker entrance with the force of concentrated hellfire. The communications center instantly erupted in flames, which engulfed every corner of the subterranean structure, destroying thousands of dollars worth of radio equipment and eliminating all technical personnel who maintained contact with Japanese artillery positions across the island. The loss of this single position disrupted defensive coordination for many square kilometers of territory, dooming isolated bunkers to fight independently, devoid of mutual support or coordinated fire missions. The tactical impact of this strike significantly surpassed the physical destruction, as Kuribayashi's ability to effectively respond to the American advance steadily deteriorated with each communications node eliminated by flamethrower attack. By 2 SP, on the first day of the assault, 8 flamethrower tanks had successfully destroyed 27 bunkers, pillboxes, and defensive positions that were initially designated as primary targets for the entire first week of operations. This breakthrough exceeded all planned estimates, creating unprecedented opportunities for rapid exploitation that threatened a complete collapse of Japanese resistance in the southern part of the island. The weapons, initially considered experimental systems, demonstrated devastating effectiveness against fortifications that only hours earlier had seemed completely impregnable. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. The Japanese counterattack began at 5:30 p.m. on February 21st, when Kuribayashi's artillery batteries emerged from their cave shelters to shell the advancing flamethrower tanks with concentrated fire. The general had spent 48 hours meticulously analyzing the new American weapon. Recognizing that their fuel systems presented critical vulnerabilities that could be exploited with precise artillery, his artillery commanders were given strict orders to prioritize flamethrower tanks over conventional armor, using high-explosive shells specifically designed to rupture fuel tanks and create catastrophic secondary explosions. The first salvo bracketed Lutz's tank as it approached a fortified ridge, sending geysers of volcanic sand and steel shrapnel across the battlefield. Lutz felt his tank shudder from the near misses as Japanese gunners adjusted their fire toward his position. The M4A3's armor could deflect small arms fire and shell fragments, but direct hits from 70 Flimbler's artillery would penetrate the hull and ignite the 400 gallons, 14 liters, of napalm stored inside. His driver, Private Johnson, executed evasive maneuvers while Lutz scanned the source of the incoming fire through his periscope. The Japanese had become adept at camouflaging their gun positions with volcanic ash and debris, making counter-battery fire significantly more difficult, even when artillery pieces betrayed their location with muzzle flashes. The vulnerability of flamethrower tanks to artillery fire had been identified during training, but combat conditions proved far more challenging than simulations could anticipate. Tank crews operating under fire faced the constant threat of a catastrophic fuel explosion, which created psychological stress significantly exceeding normal combat conditions. The knowledge that a single penetrating hit would transform their vehicle into a fireball affected crew morale and tactical decision-making in ways that had not been adequately accounted for in training. Lutz's crew maintained discipline, but the tension of operating a quote was evident in their strained radio chatter and hesitant movements. Captain McVeigh coordinated defensive measures from his command tank, directing conventional armor to provide counter-battery fire, while flamethrower tanks withdrew to protected positions. The tactical doctrine for flamethrower tank deployment inadequately accounted for sustained artillery engagements, focusing instead on rapid bunker assaults followed by immediate withdrawal. The Japanese counterattack forced Marine commanders to adapt their tactics in real time, balancing the need to protect vulnerable flamethrower tanks with the imperative to maintain offensive momentum. McVeigh ordered the remaining 7 flamethrower tanks to operate in pairs, with one vehicle providing covering fire while the other maneuvered to safety. The first catastrophic loss occurred at 6:45 p.m. when a Japanese 105mm howitzer scored a direct hit on a flamethrower tank commanded by Sergeant Peters. The high explosive shell penetrated the vehicle's side armor and detonated inside the fuel compartment, igniting the 400 gallons, 14 liters, of napalm in a fireball that soared 300 feet, 91 meters, above the volcanic landscape. The explosion was visible from ships at sea and created a mushroom cloud that marked the destruction of 1/8 of the Marine Corps' entire flamethrower tank stock. The crew perished instantly, vaporized in temperatures exceeding 3,000 Centigrade, 1650 Fahrenheit. Imagine this. You're inside a steel behemoth, designed to spew fire and obliterate enemy fortifications. You're a symbol of power, and your machine is the embodiment of terror for the enemy. But suddenly, in an instant, that symbol transforms into your own fiery trap. What is it like to realize that your armored shield could become a crematorium from one well-aimed shot? This is not just a story of war. It's a story about how even the most formidable tools can turn against those who wield them, and how that fear penetrates deep into the soul. We all face moments when our most reliable plans crumble, and confidence is replaced by anxiety. But the essence is not to avoid these trials, but to understand how to act when they arrive. Today, we will delve into one of the most dramatic episodes of World War II, on the island of Iwo Jima, where American flamethrower tanks, initially conceived as an invincible weapon, encountered a brutal reality. We will explore how enemy adaptation, internal problems, and psychological pressure turned them from a Thomas quote 106 into an quote 107. What happens when a weapon that seemed invincible suddenly reveals its fragility? How do commanders make decisions when every next step could cost not only a machine, but lives? And most importantly, how do you survive and continue to fight when the enemy learns from your mistakes and your own resources dwindle before your eyes? On Iwo Jima, where flamethrower tanks were supposed to be the decisive factor, they suddenly became vulnerable targets, instilling terror in their own crews. How could this happen? Temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees, 1650 U. Peter's death, his machine transformed into an inferno, had a profound psychological impact that permeated all surviving tank crews. Every soldier now clearly understood. Their steel fortress could, at any moment, become their own funeral pyre from a single, precisely aimed artillery shell. This terrifying loss represented not only a personal tragedy, but also a significant tactical setback. The destruction of each flamethrower tank reduced the Marine Corps' overall capacity to neutralize enemy bunkers by a full 12%. With only 7 such vehicles remaining, commanders were forced to make extremely difficult decisions, weighing every risk and potential benefit during subsequent combat operations. The weapon, which initially seemed invulnerable and delivered rapid successes, now suddenly appeared surprisingly fragile and susceptible to effective countermeasures from the enemy. Japanese artillery observers, having carefully studied previous successful engagements, quickly adapted their tactics and adjusted their fire. They focused on identifying the flamethrower tank's limited maneuverability and the predictability of their routes when approaching bunker positions. Enemy battery commanders received detailed intelligence reports on the key characteristics of American equipment, including data on fuel tank capacity, armor thickness, and tactical deployment methods, all meticulously recorded during the previous 2 days of fierce fighting. Thanks to this valuable information, Japanese gunners were able to expertly create kill zones along the most probable tank advancement paths, forming overlapping fields of fire capable of striking the flamethrower vehicles precisely at their most vulnerable moments. Only Lutz's tank managed to withstand the barraging artillery fire, skillfully utilizing natural terrain features that provided camouflage for its movements from keen Japanese observers. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. Iwo Jima's volcanic landscape itself, riddled with rocks and crevices, offered natural cover where tanks could hide between assault operations. However, these same terrain features paradoxically channeled their movement along limited, and thus predictable, roads that enemy artillery could pre-range, ensuring rapid and accurate targeting. The tactical dilemma of needing to protect flamethrower tanks while simultaneously preserving their crucial offensive power demanded unconventional, creative solutions not provided for in standard armored doctrine. In response, Lutz, demonstrating ingenuity, established close cooperation with infantry units equipped with smoke grenades. Their task was to create a dense visual screen during the approach phases to targets, significantly reducing the effectiveness of Japanese observation posts. Beyond the threat of direct destruction, another serious problem emerged that could cripple flamethrower tank operations even without a single combat loss: the fuel supply crisis. Each vehicle, on average, consumed a colossal 60 gallons, 227 liters, of napalm per hour during active combat, completely emptying its 400-gallon 1514-liter tank in just 7 hours of continuous fighting. The logistical chain required to constantly replenish these supplies significantly exceeded the capabilities of existing auxiliary facilities on the coast. This forced military engineers, risking their lives, to establish forward fuel depots directly under enemy fire. Furthermore, the specific nature of napalm created additional handling difficulties. This thick gasoline mixture required heating to maintain the necessary fluidity, especially in cool weather conditions. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. Following Peter's death, Sergeant Martinez assumed command of the second flamethrower tank. He inherited a crew who had witnessed their lead vehicle vanish in a fiery inferno, leaving nothing identifiable behind. The psychological trauma of operating a weapon capable of incinerating themselves at any moment had a measurable impact on combat effectiveness, noticeably slowing reaction times and degrading coordination among crew members under unbearable stress. Recognizing this threat, Martinez promptly implemented crew rotation procedures. His goal was to prevent psychological breakdown by ensuring no individual remained at peak stress levels for extended periods of active combat operations. But while the Americans grappled with internal demons, the enemy remained vigilant, developing new countermeasures. Japanese defensive adaptations gained momentum as engineers under Kuribayashi actively developed countermeasures specifically designed to repel flamethrower attacks. Bunker modifications included not only water spray systems capable of effectively extinguishing napalm fires, but also improved ventilation systems that reduced the effectiveness of flame penetration into fortifications, and structural changes designed to divert liquid fuel away from the most critical areas. While these modifications could not be implemented at all defensive positions due to limited resources, they nonetheless represented a systematic effort to neutralize the key advantage of American flamethrower weapons through engineering solutions rather than solely tactical maneuvers. However, even the most advanced machines required constant attention to remain operational. Combat engineers from the 5th Marine Division, fully aware that mechanical failures posed as great a threat to specialized equipment as enemy action, promptly established repair facilities behind the front lines to service the remaining flamethrower tanks. The flamethrower systems required continuous and meticulous maintenance due to napalm's aggressive corrosive effect on metal components and the high pressures involved in fuel delivery. Technicians worked around the clock, without respite, to keep the tanks combat-ready, often performing repairs directly under artillery fire, as Japanese gunners deliberately targeted support facilities alongside forward combat units. All these efforts led to the battle reaching a tactical stalemate at a certain point. The tactical stalemate, clearly evident by February 23rd, starkly reflected the mutual adaptation of both sides to the constantly evolving battlefield conditions. Japanese forces had learned to effectively counter flamethrower attacks through improved artillery and defensive modifications. At the same time, Marine commanders struggled to protect their vulnerable flamethrower tanks without sacrificing their decisive offensive capability. The initial breakthrough, which had seemed to promise a swift victory, gave way to a grueling war of attrition that increasingly favored the well-prepared defender positions and their interior lines of communication. Under these circumstances, the value of each specialized weapon became unprecedentedly high. The 8 experimental weapons, which had so decisively altered the initial phase of the battle, now represented a diminishing asset, requiring extremely careful and deliberate use for the most critically important operations. McVeigh received orders to preserve the remaining tanks for the final assault on Mount Suribachi. This decision, based on the recognition that the unique specialized capabilities of these machines would be absolutely essential for capturing the fortress complex crowning Iwo Jima's southern peak, reflected the harsh lessons learned regarding vulnerability and resilience in prolonged combat. The weapon, which initially seemed a simple solution to complex tactical problems, proved in practice to require planning and resource management as meticulous as that for conventional systems, but with the added complexity of extreme vulnerability to enemy countermeasures. Quietly, without much fanfare, but growing stronger each day, a sense of unease builds within many of us. Perhaps you've caught yourself thinking, "What? How? Is this about me?" It's that feeling when you suddenly realize something is missing, some crucial detail slipping from view. That's exactly what we'll be discussing today. We've been where you are, on the other side of the screen, and we know how to tackle this inner struggle. Today, we'll unveil the secrets to overcoming the invisible barriers that prevent you from moving forward. How do you identify what's holding you back from a breakthrough? And most importantly, how can you leverage hidden knowledge to change your situation? Stay with us and watch until the end, because we'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. In this video, we'll delve into the events that turned the tide of one of history's most ferocious battles, you'll discover three key moments that allowed for the breaking of an impregnable enemy defense. And here's the first one. Prepare to learn how one of the most powerful defensive lines, one you might not even have suspected, was actually breached. What if what seemed invincible actually had an Achilles heel that no one saw? The assault on Mount Suribachi began precisely at just 6 on March 10th. At that fateful hour, 5 surviving flamethrower tanks led their final desperate push against Kuribayashi's command complex. This volcanic peak, rising 169 meters above the battlefield, was riddled with a complex network of tunnels and chambers, the creation of which had taken 8 months of painstaking labor. According to intelligence, approximately 3,000 Japanese defenders remained within this mountain fortress. They were sheltered behind 4.5-meter layers of solid rock and concrete barriers, capable of withstanding direct hits from 16-inch naval guns. Captain McVeigh, understanding the full complexity of the task, positioned his tanks in a semicircle at the base of the mountain. He coordinated with artillery observers to precisely identify cave entrances that required flame treatment. Lutz's tank cautiously approached the main tunnel entrance on the eastern slope of the mountain. It was here that a 70mm anti-tank gun had held back infantry assaults for 3 long days. The cave opening was securely protected by a 6-inch thick steel door, equipped with embrasures that allowed the gun crew to engage targets while remaining protected from return fire. Conventional explosives proved powerless to breach this entrance, and infantry attempts to approach the position resulted in heavy casualties from supporting machine gun nests located higher up the slopes. The flamethrower tank represented the only weapon system capable of neutralizing this position without prohibitive losses. The approach route to the cave entrance traversed 731 meters of open terrain, covered by overlapping fields of fire from numerous defensive positions. Japanese observers in the caves higher up the mountain could direct artillery fire onto any vehicle attempting to reach the anti-tank gun position, creating a veritable killing zone. This zone had already claimed the lives of 2 conventional tanks during previous assault attempts. Lutz coordinated with smoke teams to create visual obscuration, while artillery batteries fired white phosphorus rounds to conceal his tank's movement across the open ground. The steel door protecting the cave entrance was manufactured at the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal and transported to Iwo Jima in sections during the defensive preparation phase. This barrier weighed a colossal 11.9 tons and was designed to withstand explosive charges up to 500 pounds. Internal reinforcement distributed blast effects throughout the structure. Japanese engineers calculated that American forces lacked the specialized equipment needed to overcome such massive obstacles, rendering the cave positions virtually invulnerable to conventional assault. They failed to account for one thing: the possibility that liquid fire could flow through the embrasures like burning water. Stay with us and watch until the end, because we'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Private Johnson navigated Lutz's tank across the crater-pocked landscape with surgical precision. He utilized shell craters and piles of debris for concealment, while maintaining the speed necessary to minimize exposure to enemy fire. The tank's 36.9-ton weight created plumes of volcanic dust, which helped to mask its movement, but also revealed its position to observers equipped with binoculars. Artillery shells began to fall around the vehicle as Japanese gunners attempted to bracket their target, sending geysers of black sand and steel shrapnel along the approach route. At a distance of 300 feet from the cave entrance, Lutz ordered his gunner to prepare for flamethrower operation as the tank maneuvered into optimal firing position. The steel door completely filled his periscope, its surface riddled with bullets and shell fragments from previous assault attempts. The embrasures were barely visible as dark rectangles in the massive barrier, but reconnaissance photographs provided precise measurements that allowed for accurate targeting. The napalm stream needed to penetrate the embrasures and pass into the chamber beyond, where it could ignite stored ammunition and eliminate the gun crew through heat and toxic gases. The flamethrower burst lasted 12 seconds, ejecting 200 gallons of napalm across the remaining distance to the cave entrance. The burning fuel struck the steel door and flowed through the embrasures like liquid lightning, instantly filling the chamber with flames reaching temperatures exceeding 2000 degrees. The anti-tank gun crew perished within seconds, suffocating from the superheated gases that seared their lungs before they could reach the chamber's rear exit. The 75mm gun that had dominated the eastern approach route fell silent, its barrel glowing red-hot from the infernal flames that consumed its position. The destruction of the anti-tank gun position created a breach in Kuribayashi's defensive perimeter that infantry companies could exploit to reach the base of the mountain. Captain Shoup led his Marines through this breach, using flame-scorched rocks for cover, advancing towards secondary cave entrances where machine gun nests and mortar positions were located. The psychological impact of witnessing their strongest defensive position consumed by flames demoralized Japanese soldiers in supporting positions, many of whom abandoned their posts rather than face similar annihilation. McVeigh directed his remaining 4 tanks toward the cave systems on the northern and western slopes of the mountain, where Japanese defenders had established overlapping fields of fire, controlling all approaches to the summit. These positions were smaller than the main tunnel complex, but similarly well protected by concrete barriers and steel doors that blocked direct access to the interior chambers. The flamethrower tanks would need to operate independently, as the terrain hindered mutual support between vehicles and limited artillery support due to steep angles. Sergeant Martinez, commanding the second flamethrower tank in the assault, targeted a machine gun nest carved into the mountainside 300 feet above sea level. This position had a clear view of the entire western beach area and had been firing on amphibious operations for 2 weeks. Infantry assaults on the cave had failed due to the steep approach route and supporting fire from adjacent positions. The flamethrower tank offered the only way to eliminate the threat without casualties that could weaken the assault companies. And that's what we'll discuss in the next segment. Imagine the most impregnable fortress. Dozens of meters underground, walls 10 feet thick, labyrinths of tunnels dug with engineering precision. Such a defense would seem invincible. But what if I told you it fell in a matter of minutes? How is this possible? What kind of weapon could crush what was thought to be indestructible? And why does the story of these events still remain in the shadows? Today, we'll delve into one of the most brutal pages of World War II to uncover the secret of the weapon that turned the tide of the Battle of Iwo Jima. Japanese engineers, masterfully skilled in mining techniques, honed in the harsh conditions of Manchuria, created a veritable underground labyrinth on Iwo Jima. One such machine gun nest was a cave extending a full 60 feet deep into the solid rock. The entrance to this refuge was securely covered by a massive concrete barrier, leaving only a narrow firing embrasure no more than 18 inches wide. Through it, the machine gunner could deliver deadly fire while remaining virtually invulnerable to return attacks. The inner walls of the chamber were meticulously lined with steel plates, which not only prevented collapses, but also created a sealed space capable of retaining flames and toxic gases for extended periods, rendering it impregnable to conventional ordnance. However, against this seemingly perfect defensive position, a new, terrifying answer was deployed. Sergeant Martinez expertly maneuvered his tank, positioning it on a specially carved ledge on the mountainside. Engaging a complex hydraulic stabilization system, he achieved incredible precision, firing upwards at a 45-degree angle. The flamethrower mechanism had been specially modified to operate at such extreme inclinations. But even the most exhaustive training could not entirely eliminate all ballistic challenges. The liquid fuel, napalm, had to arc through the air like an artillery shell to strike that narrow opening with sufficient force and accuracy and penetrate deep inside the impregnable cave. It was a task at the very edge of what was possible. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And then, in the pre-dawn air, a burst of flame arced, obeying its predetermined ballistic trajectory, and slammed into the cave entrance with truly devastating precision. The superheated napalm, like a river of fire, surged through the narrow firing embrasure, instantly filling the chamber. It clung to every surface, creating an infernal, hellish blaze that furiously consumed the oxygen vital for life. The machine gun crew perished in an instant, and 20 rounds of ammunition stored inside detonated in secondary fires, illuminating the cave's interior like a superheated oven. The western approaches to Mount Suribachi, which had seemed impregnable, were cleared of the enemy in just 15 seconds of fiery storm. This was just the beginning. Stay with us and watch until the end. We'd be especially grateful for a like and a subscription. And of course, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. By noon on March 10th, the situation on Mount Suribachi had dramatically changed. Just 5 flamethrower tanks, operating with methodical ruthlessness, had managed to destroy 47 cave positions, bunkers, and other defensive strongpoints that had previously formed the backbone of Japanese resistance. This systematic and relentless annihilation created critical breaches in the seemingly continuous defensive perimeter, opening a path for infantry companies to the mountain's summit. The psychological effect of this new weapon proved even more devastating than the tactical damage. Japanese defenders watched in horror as their most reliable and impregnable shelters were consumed by flames, against which they had absolutely no effective defense. But the main objective, the heart of the resistance, still remained untouched. The final decisive assault was directed at General Kuribayashi's command bunker, which, according to intelligence, continued to direct Iwo Jima's last pockets of resistance from his sanctuary. This operation required unprecedented coordination from all 5 remaining flamethrower tanks. which were to converge on a reinforced chamber buried an incredible 50 feet beneath the mountain's very summit. This position was designed as a truly impregnable citadel. Its concrete walls reached 10 feet in thickness, and numerous escape routes connected to an extensive network of tunnels riddling the entire mountain. Kuribayashi was convinced his fortress was absolutely invulnerable, but Iwo Jima's fate had already been sealed. The culmination arrived with a flamethrower assault that lasted 37 minutes. 5 steel behemoths methodically annihilated every defensive position entrenched on the slopes and summit of Mount Suribachi. When the flames finally subsided, the once proud fortress, deemed unconquerable, lay in complete ruins. Its tunnels were filled with acrid smoke, and its defenders were silenced forever. The weapon, which just 3 weeks prior had been perceived as experimental, proved its absolute capability to crush the most formidable and impregnable defensive structures ever erected by the Japanese Empire. Thus concluded one of the most ferocious battles of the Pacific Campaign, leaving behind not only ruins but also a new lesson on the power and horror of war.